Since 2014, figures show there have been an increased number of assaults on our streets. The vast majority of these occur between Friday and Monday, a weekend glut of physical assaults, violent robberies, and general disregard for the law.
Suspect has been spotted. We're in pursuit.
Our nation's youth are hugely overrepresented when it comes to these violent crimes, with 50% of serious assaults being carried out by people under the age of 30. Youth crime affects everyone in society, but for those it directly touches, it can be devastating. Victims and their families are left to pick up the pieces. But for society at large, the question remains, how best to deal with Ireland's young, dumb and dangerous?
Ultraviolence means a situation where the threat of violence escalates very quickly to acts of extremely serious violence.
We do see patients who have been victims of sustained assaults where there does seem to be significant malice or intent on the part of the assailant to cause significant injuries.
Extreme violence was always with us, but it was more random, more ad hoc. To have a good night out now, violence isn't simply enough, but ultra-violence. And it's now become normal within that community for that to be part of a Saturday night. Not just a punch-up, not just a scuffle, but violence that can lead to death.
Rather than perhaps punching the person once or twice or inflicting one or two blows, it's multiple blows, perhaps repeated over a period of time, multiple stab wounds, sometimes over 100 inflicted on the victim.
I think as a society we probably are somewhat desensitized to violence, and that's because we see a lot of it. What we might have seen years ago on television or in the cinema is now available on the internet, on social media. And like anything, if you see enough of it, it stops to have a shock factor. And on occasions, that perhaps is the trigger for committing a crime like this, because it's not perceived as being dangerous or even wrong.
There's good empirical research to show that violence on screen, violent computer games, do not assist in a normal adolescent psychological upbringing. And there really is no dispute about that. The dispute arises as to the extent and the effect it has. On its own, it probably doesn't have that great an effect. But when you tie it in with all the other societal, environmental and familial problems that people can have, it's a powder keg, and it's not just waiting to happen, it's happening at the moment.
And while increasing exposure to on-screen violence may be a factor in youth crime, experts believe it's less important than the social context in which the offender has been raised.
Young people from troubled backgrounds can often become more predisposed to being involved in a serious incident involving a high level of violence. That was shown in the case of Garda Sergeant Mark Clark, who was gunned down and was lucky to escape with his life after he responded to an incident in Crumlin in 2006.
On the morning of 27 September 2006, I was based in the uniform section of Crumlin Garda Station. We started work just before 6 a.m. and straight off the bat immediately we got a call regarding the shooting at Monster Boyce Road in Crumlin. Garda Leanna Cruz, who was in the patrol car with me that morning, went straight to the scene, and we found that the Kenny house on Monster Boyce Road had been subject to a drive-by shooting. The front window had been shot through with a shotgun. We observed the scene initially, and after a while we were joined by Sergeant Mark Clark and Garda Maria Finn before we returned to the station to commence some of the investigative duties required for that incident.
It wouldn't be our standard call out, but in Crumlin at that time there were a high percentage of firearm incidents being recorded, so you never really knew at any stage of the day what your next call would be.
The sort of personality that ignores the norms of society is a person who has never been in society. If you're wearing a uniform, if you're in authority, they will let you know, these young criminals, in no uncertain terms, what they think about you.
Initially at the scene, and from speaking to witnesses, there were reports that a wine-coloured Mitsubishi Lancer had been used in the shooting and had fled the scene. We were there approximately an hour, and at the top of the road, we noticed the Lancer appeared again.
Garda Feehan went to investigate this car, and it sped away. It went around the block and pulled up outside 10 Monaster Boyce Road, where Sergeant Clark was still in situ.
At that stage, I felt it would just speed past me. I didn't for any second think that it would stop and stay outside the house, but I realised that it was staying put. It wasn't going to move. The windows were tinted in it as well, so I couldn't see how many people were inside it. As I got closer to it, I decided that my best option was to try to reach in and remove the keys from the ignition. I removed my hat, and as I got up to the wing mirror, I reached in, and just as I looked into the vehicle, I saw the front seat passenger had a sawn-off shotgun, and he had a cut across his arm, pointing it towards me. I knew straight away he was going to shoot. The shot hit me across my side and arm, and I was knocked to the left off a parked car. I got up on my feet, and at that stage, I suppose I was in shock. I looked around, and everyone was screaming and shouting on the street. I looked up the road, and I could see my hat was about 4 or 5 yards up the road. So I walked up just to pick up the hat, and as I bent down to pick it up, I could see blood trickling down onto the roadway. I looked at my wrist, and I saw that blood was pumping from the vein on my hand.
When the shotgun is discharged, the pellets are forced out of the barrel of the weapon. Now, initially, the pellets will all travel together, but as the range and distance increases, then the pellets start to fan out. And because of their energy, when they hit the target, they're not going to be stopped by the skin or the muscle, so they're going to penetrate the internal organs, the heart, lungs, liver, and obviously then are potentially fatal.
I walked across the road to lie against a wall, and at that stage, Garda Maria Feehan came running up towards me, and she was screaming that I had been shot. She put her hand on my chest in through the jacket, and when she took out her hand, there was blood on it. So at that stage, the realisation hit me that I had been shot in the chest.
As Mark Clark was rushed to the hospital in the back of a patrol car, Gardas John Dunn, Leanna Cruz and Jacinta Gordon, who were en route back to the scene, were updated about the shooting and took up the chase for the fleeing Mitsubishi Lancer.
We encountered the vehicle on the Crumlin Road, coming from Raffo Road, as they were fleeing the scene. We spun the patrol car around, gave chase.
Suspect has been spotted. We're in pursuit.
It was a short vehicle pursuit. It only lasted for about a kilometre, but it was certainly for me one of the most hair-raising I've been involved in.
High-speed chase that was involved in this particular case is symptomatic of the way young people are going and society is going, because it's all about the thrill and the expectation.
It was 7:30 a.m. There was people about getting up to go to work, only to be met with the appalling vista of 3 drugged-up, gun-toting thugs careening through their quiet neighbourhood of narrow residential streets in a stolen car.
The young driver lost control of the car after colliding with a Ford Fiesta. The Fiesta was knocked over on its side. The Lancer came to a halt.
I think the impact of the collision stuns the occupants for a second or two. That gave my colleagues and I the chance to get to the car before they got out. I went to the driver's side to try and pull the driver out. He was fighting desperately with me, struggling. I couldn't get a good grip on him. I literally at one stage grabbed his head, trying to snag anything. At that stage I felt him bite my hand. I had to pull away.
At this point, the gunman in the front and the passenger in the rear of the car fled the scene. The passenger was easily apprehended, but the youth carrying the sawn-off shotgun already used to shoot Mark Clark would now stop at nothing in his bid to escape. Next, he set his sights on hijacking a van.
Thankfully for everyone involved, he picked the wrong van to hijack that morning. The driver, an extremely brave man, big man, the proverbial brick outhouse, as they say, was more than a match for him. Radford demanded he drive, and as I subsequently learned from reading the driver's statements, in a very cool and collected manoeuvre, he took the keys out of the ignition, put them in his pocket and said no. This gave Garda Cruz and I the opportunity to get to the van, but to my horror, the shot discharged. My initial reaction was, that man is dead. Amazingly, I saw he continued to struggle. As I learned later, he had the presence of mind just before Jonathan Radford pulled the trigger to push the barrel of the gun away from his face, and the shotgun discharged inches from his face. I got the opportunity then at that stage to open the door of the van. I took him to the ground and, with a huge sense of relief, cuffed him, and at that stage gave the driver of the van one of the heartiest handshakes I've ever given anyone in my life.
The gunman was 22-year-old Jonathan Radford. He and the other occupants of the car, both aged 16, were brought to Sundrive Road Garda Station. But while there, Radford took a turn for the worse.
Radford collapsed from a drug overdose in Sundrive Garda Station shortly after his arrest and had to be rushed to hospital.
Jonathan Radford said he had not intended to kill Sergeant Clark. However, Judge Frank O'Donnell said he found this difficult to reconcile with the reality of firing a gun directly at him. He sentenced Radford to 12 years in prison, with the last 2 suspended, after he pleaded guilty to possession of ammunition and a firearm with intent to endanger life.
There was great satisfaction in arresting somebody who was clearly so dangerous, having such a central role in a significant arrest. It's double the satisfaction given that he'd maimed one of my colleagues.
In relation to long-term effects from my injuries and that, I've been left with 13 pellets in my chest and 5 in my arm that weren't removed because they were so deep. Too much tissue damage would have been done to have them surgically removed. For me to return to work, it wasn't difficult. I was actually anxious and keen to get back to work. I'd been off for 3 months. I wanted to prove to everyone and to myself that I didn't have a problem returning to work in the same area where the incident had happened.
Both Sergeant Clark and Garda John Dunn were later awarded the Scott Medal for bravery. The 16-year-old youth who drove the car was sentenced to 7 years for unlawful possession of a firearm and ammunition. The last 3 years of the sentence was suspended.
I have to say, I was a little surprised at the young ages. 2 16-year-olds. It's relatively rare for people at that age to graduate, if you like, to armed crime. Not so much Radford. However, when you consider their backgrounds, they were from backgrounds which most people would probably consider to be broken homes, perhaps. Crime was the norm.
What you generally find are those people who are engaged in this type of serious crime and ultra-violent situations in particular, they come from pockets of the city here, or urban areas, that are generally characterised by social deprivation, poverty, and have huge problems like drug abuse.
Both Jonathan Radford and the 16-year-old were on cocaine at the time. In fact, Radford collapsed from a drug overdose in Sundrive Garda Station shortly after his arrest and had to be rushed to hospital. Both are second-generation drug addicts. Their mothers are drug addicts, their stepfathers were drug addicts, and both saw their stepfathers die when they were just children. Radford was homeless at the time, the 16-year-old out of control.
Drugs are definitely a major factor for me in violent crime. People are just, I think, desensitised to the effects of their violence. It increases the tendency for violence in people who have it in them.
And the other thing that we certainly have seen a lot of in previous years is the combination of alcohol and cocaine together, which has a synergistic reaction, so that the violence and aggression that you see in somebody who's taken alcohol with cocaine is often much greater than the sum of the two parts.
But not just drugs that we commonly know to be illegal drugs, like your heroin and cocaine, but also prescribed medication, which are used to make kind of these drug cocktails that an awful lot of ultra-violent offenders are on at the time of an offence is carried out.
Drugs are at the heart of it, because drugs form the trigger, but they also are the excuse. And they can rationalize it because it was something else that made them do it. In other words, they just abrogate responsibility for themselves. To an extent, they have a point, because their lives are overridden by drugs, alcohol, substance abuse, and so on. But ultimately, they're still making choices, and they're making very bad ones.
This is symptomatic of certain young people going off the rails. It's not really representative of young people generally in the country. It's representative of a certain demographic that become your hardened criminal. There is a greater prevalence of this type of crime in the Dublin city area simply because it's the biggest city in the country, and it has certain areas which unfortunately have developed very poor social problems. They're blighted by drug abuse, poverty, unemployment, and this has sadly led to an awful lot of people turning to crime.
I don't believe there has been a spiralling in relation to young people involved in crime, but like every area, Crumlin has its problems, and young people, if they don't get the correct facilities and the right agencies involved in at a young age, there is a propensity for them there to turn towards crime.
Garda Síochána is very conscious of the need to engage with young people at an early age. In this regard, we would be involved with meeting with young people in both primary and secondary schools as part of our schools programme. This programme is dealt with bringing and giving practical information to young people on personal safety, substance abuse, and also crime prevention.
They have excellent experience with helping divert young people from crime. They have a proven track record through the Juvenile Liaison Office, which generally keeps most young offenders, first-time offenders, out of the court system and leave them at a place where they're unlikely to come back before the criminal justice system.
They try and show a positive side to Garda Síochána and try and deter young people from getting involved in crime. But it's a multi-agency approach, you know. Parents have to get involved as well.
We know from academic research that parental supervision is at the heart of criminal behaviours. And that's the problem. Parents are not showing their interest in their children. They're not concerned about their peer groups. They're not concerned about whether they're going to school or not. And when you're in an environment like that, in one sense, you can't blame the young child that they may go out and create mischief initially and then something more serious later on. The problem with young people and crime is the buzz is never big enough anymore, so it's escalating. The problem for society is that it's not just on the streets anymore, it's not just in the nightclubs, it's not just in the clubs, but it's coming to your home.
One of the more obvious recent examples was an incident in the City West area in Dublin in November 2014.
Gardaí were notified about the attack by a neighbour who heard noises coming from the residence of the injured parties. Upon hearing the noises, she looked outside her home to observe young males leaving in the injured party's car. The car was driven away at speed and she recognised that these were not the owners of the car, and she recognised them not being residents of the house next door to her.
When the Gardaí got to the house, they found a mother and her child had been held captive, that they had been threatened, that she had been sexually assaulted, and that a considerable amount of money along with her car had been taken.
That day started very normal. I brought my daughter to school and I drove home from her school. I went to carry on my own duties, doing some errands. I was washing the dishes and I heard a banging noise at the door. The first thing got into my mind was my son, because he was still sleeping upstairs in his room and I was concerned of his safety.
She attempted to hold the front door closed. However, these 5 males powered their way past her into the hallway.
They were screaming at me, saying, "Where is your safe? Where is your money?"
This lady was targeted because they suspected that she was keeping a large sum of money in her house. She was also alone, and they knew that. One member of the gang had been carrying out surveillance at the house over the previous months and knew that she would be there alone with her boy at the time they arrived at the house.
So there's a premeditation there from the beginning. But for me, with my background, what I'm concerned about is that when they went in there was effectively a torture scene developed, psychological and indeed physical.
One man picked up a meat cleaver from my counter and used it against my neck, and then asked me if I don't cooperate, I don't provide the location of the safe, then they are going to cut my finger off.
The situation escalated very quickly. Then they went up to a bedroom and they brought down the 10-year-old boy and they threatened him. They threatened also that they'd take him away from her.
It's not just about burglarizing a house and leaving and getting chased. It's about the ancillary crimes that can be committed in the house, either to get a reward in the house or just for the sake of it.
I think the situation escalated to such an extent that they were competing with each other in terms of how violent they could be.
Modelling their behaviours or threatening behaviours on what they see on screen, on television, in social media, on YouTube. Young people of that nature are just solely informed by that. They're not reading Shakespeare anymore. You know, they're not listening to tapes of Joyce. They're not listening to anything. They're not listening to anybody. They're not reading anything. The only thing they're doing is involving themselves in all the dark side of social media. To make things even more worrying, there was no alcohol or substance abuse involved, because one of them remarked that he liked to keep his mind, quotes, simple, while he went in to do some grafting, as he called it.
At one point during the ordeal, the lady made an attempt to escape via the front door. She was unable to exit as the front door was double locked from the inside. The attackers immediately grabbed her and dragged her by the neck with her son.
As they searched frantically, one of the raiders sexually assaulted the victim in front of her son.
And there was an inference made that he would even go as far as to rape her if she didn't tell where the money was.
It was this that forced her to hand over the money. It was in the house.
They put me and my son into the bathroom. Then I heard they left.
In all, the ordeal would have gone on nearly a half an hour. Approximately 8 a.m. A member of the public contacted the Gardaí via the 999 system.
Detective Garda Corrigan and I attended the Brookfield area of Tala. We located the injured party's vehicle at the end of a roadway in a housing estate. The Garda helicopter immediately carried out a search.
And nearby, there was a male person in the back garden attempting to set fire to what appeared to be clothing and footwear.
The male who was identified burning the clothing was arrested and interviewed at Tala Garda station in the presence of his solicitor and parent.
The suspect was 17-year-old Liam Fox. He and 2 juvenile accomplices later pleaded guilty to the aggravated burglary. Only those 3 of the 5 raiders were ever charged. The attacker who exposed himself and sexually assaulted the homeowner has never been identified.
The difficulty with young offenders like Liam Fox is they don't see their excessive violence as abnormal behaviour. Torture is part of the language. Torture is part of the day's work, because at the end of the day you will get a reward, be it monetary or otherwise. So that's a real difficulty for society, who's trying to go forward in what we might regard as a civilized way, when we've a significant group of feral youth like that who see violence as part of a day's work, no more, no less.
After the terrifying experience, my son were not the same. He couldn't sleep on his own. He had to sleep in the same room with me. He looks strong. He's a tough kid, but I think psychologically it's scarring.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, it doesn't just last a week, a month, or a year. It stays with people, all people, for the rest of their lives and their families.
Due to the nature of the charge and the incident, it was much too serious to be dealt with in the city's juvenile court. So a decision was made that it should go to the circuit court level, which can impose far lengthier sentences. And in this case, Liam Fox and his 2 accomplices pleaded guilty to aggravated burglary. and all three received custodial sentences. Fox got an 8-year sentence with 3 years suspended. His two co-defendants also got 8-year sentences, and 3.5 years of their sentences were suspended.
For young people under the age of 18 especially, any kind of custodial sanction should be a measure of last resort. That is, it shouldn't be imposed unless it is absolutely necessary, and that the emphasis should be on reform and rehabilitation rather than on punishment.
During his defence, Liam Fox's solicitor revealed that his client owed a large drug debt and that it was being passed on to his family. This, he argued, had forced Fox into the aggravated burglary.
For any young person out there to think that there's such a thing as a get-rich-quick scheme whereby you'd commit such a vicious crime as this and get away with it, they should think again. Clearly, if such a crime occurs, it's going to be fully investigated. People will be made accountable. They will be brought before the courts. And the courts, when it's outlined to them what occurred, will deal severely with anyone who engages in such criminality.
A case like this is symptomatic of despondency among young offenders in areas such as this, where they are looking to make a quick buck, and frequently, with their ill-gotten gains, they fritter the money away on drink and drugs very, very quickly.
We've always had despondent youth in Ireland, and a despondent society, you could say, particularly certain sections. But whether we can put despondency down as some form of excuse or reason as to why they commit such terrible crimes in people's homes is a leap of faith, in my view.
I suppose individually, I don't think any of these persons would have, or these accused would have partook in such a violent criminal act, but they're coming together. The kind of gang mentality resulted in them carrying out such a despicable robbery, and regardless of the consequences for the victim and her son.
Although group aggression can accelerate the level of ultraviolence applied, lone males can be just as savage. The horrific murder of Gavin O'Connor from Kilmainham Wood in County Meath is testament to this.
Gavin had one brother called Patrick and a sister called Judith. He loved life. He was always very easygoing, laid back. He let nothing get to him. He was very witty, and he just was our beautiful son.
When you walked into a room full of people, like, you'd pick out Gavin straight away. He had this cheeky grin and a smile. Like, I'd say he had to fight off the women most nights.
Gavin and a group of friends set up a little band called Climax with his good friend Liam. Gavin was a real rock star. He was tall, he had good looks, he had real long hair, he had everything. So he really stood out at the front. To me, he was absolutely lovely boy to have around the house. Second pair of hands, anything you wanted done, he was there to help you. And he had a great love for music, which I have as well. And it's all gone.
It was the first weekend in June of 2011, and Carrickmacross was preparing to host its annual music festival. Gavin, a talented guitarist, was due to play with his band at Shevlin's pub on the Saturday evening and was deliberating whether to go out the night before his gig.
He had originally told me he wasn't going out because his girlfriend Aoife was working Saturday morning and she had forgot to book it off. So he said he had decided he wasn't going to go out. And at about 8:30, Gavin came in here to me and he said to me, "Mum, I'm going to Carrickmacross." And that is the last time I spoke to Gavin.
That night he was just an exceptional form. We all were. We were all looking forward to that weekend, we were.
In the early hours of June 4th, two people returning home from a house party in Lisdoonan discovered a badly injured male on the roadway and called an ambulance. Both men knew Gavin O'Connor, but due to the severity of his facial injuries, neither instantly recognised the victim.
When Gavin was found on the roadway, he was in an unconscious state. There was a lot of blood on his face and blood in the immediate area of where he was lying. Gardaí attending the scene suspected straight away that something serious had happened here, and the scene was immediately cordoned off for full forensic examination.
And at 6:50 on Saturday morning, Jerry and Helena received the phone call every parent dreads.
I jumped out of bed and I ran up here and I answered the house phone, and it was Gavin's girlfriend Aoife, and she said to me, "Helena, John McMahon is after ringing me and he said that Gavin is gone to Drogheda in a bad way in an ambulance." Got to Drogheda and straight away we were taken into the family room. Aoife was already there. The doctor came in and the first thing the doctor said was, "Gavin is not going to make it." He said, "Gavin came in this morning at 5:30 and we did a brain scan." And he said, "The only way I can explain it to you is that the brain should be in 4 compartments and all Gavin has is a big red mush." He said, "Eventually, Gavin's heart is going to start to slow, and when it stops, we won't be restarting it."
He told us that we were going to see something that we'd never seen in our life, and we said we wanted to see him. He said, "Give us a half an hour till we clean him up a bit and we'll come back to you." He came back out to us and he brought us in, and as we opened the door, we could see Gavin. And we backtracked. It took 3 attempts to go into the room to Gavin. His head was twice the size it should have been, and it was tight to get up. But we knew it was him. We did.
It's hard to put it into words what you're experiencing when you're in there, you know. Such a, like, see him laying there on his deathbed, and for a man who was so full of life, it was hard.
Never seen nothing like it. Never forget it. It'll haunt me for the rest of my life. Terrible how anybody could do such a thing to a human being. Terrible. Terrible.
On the 4th of June 2011, 22-year-old musician Gavin O'Connor was found in Lisdoonan with severe head injuries and taken to hospital in Drogheda. Gardaí were contacted and attended the scene. Simultaneously, another call was being made to Carrickmacross Garda Station.
A phone call was made from Oliver Mulligan in Castleblaney. Oliver reported that a friend of his, Conor McClelland, had arrived at his house and was banging on his window looking to gain access.
Conor McClelland told his friend that he'd stolen a car in Carrickmacross and had been violent towards the owner. Mulligan was concerned and notified Gardaí.
So they sent the Garda car out and it drove around the back of the house, and there was a car there. And the guard typed in the number of the car, and up come Gavin O'Connor. And the guard says, "How could that be?" So Gavin O'Connor's gone to Drogheda in an ambulance. They went into the house, and this Conor McClelland fella was asleep on the couch, covered in blood.
At that point then, the Gardaí spoke with Conor McClelland. They brought him out the back and asked him to account for the car which was there. And while speaking to him, he took off running across fields from the house. The Gardaí pursued him and he was arrested at 8:12 a.m. that morning.
Back in Drogheda, Gavin's family and friends were assembling at the hospital to say their goodbyes.
Everybody, the family that was there and Gavin's friends came in, and we were all at his bedside, and the nurse whispered to me and she said to me, "Would you like me to clear the room just before he passes?"
No.
And I said to her, "No." I said, "They loved him every bit as much as we do, and I want him to know we're all here with him." So we were all there when Gavin's heart gave its final beat.
I don't think I could be consoled. I was shouting at him, "Oh, we're all here for you. It's all right." For some reason I said it was all right, you can go. It wasn't all right. It wasn't his time. He had so much to live for.
Gavin O'Connor was pronounced dead at 6:43 p.m. on Saturday the 4th of June 2011, elevating the investigation from assault to murder.
And he was moved to the chapel of rest, and there was a guard on duty. And we were in the chapel of rest, and Jerry leaned over and gave Gavin a kiss. And the guard said to him, "Don't touch him again, Jerry, he's evidence." My son was evidence. We weren't allowed to touch him.
Back in Carrickmacross, Gardaí were questioning Conor McClelland and informed him that his victim had died. McClelland said he needed some air, but once outside, he tried to abscond for a second time.
Conor McClelland was interviewed on 6 occasions during his period of detention in Carrickmacross Garda Station. During the course of those interviews, he admitted that he came into Carrickmacross that evening to attend the music festival, that he went around a number of pubs, met a few friends, had a few drinks, that he came down the street and observed a car with a person lying asleep in the back of the car. He opened the door of this car and found that it was opened. He got into the car. He then searched the person who was sleeping in the back, which was Gavin, and found the keys of the car in his pocket. He took this car then and drove out the road to Lisdoonan.
McClelland admitted that he'd been unable to hail a taxi and had stolen Gavin's car to get home. He also took Gavin's phone from his pocket and called his friend to discuss a plan to burn the car once he'd finished with it. Then things took an even more sinister turn.
While in the course of that journey, Gavin awoke and spoke to Conor McClelland and asked what he was doing. Conor McClelland then stopped the car, got out, got a number of rocks, and came back into the car and hit Gavin a number of times over the head with these rocks. He made reference that he was annoying his head when he woke up, and this triggered him into the vicious assault that took place.
After battering Gavin with the rocks, McClelland stepped out of the car to clear his head.
While walking up the road, he looked round and he saw that Gavin had got out of the car. He noticed that Gavin was covered in blood. He was standing in the middle of the roadway. Conor McClelland went back up, got into Gavin's car, drove it up the road, turned around and drove the car back down the road, hitting Gavin with the car. It was Conor McClelland's intention to make this look like a traffic accident in order to cover his tracks.
The post-mortem results revealed that Gavin's injuries were consistent with vehicular impact and that he'd suffered a hinge fracture after McClelland ran the car over his head.
A hinge-type fracture of the skull is often caused when there's a compressive force applied to the head. And what happens is that the fracture runs across the base of the skull from one side of the skull to the other, often from ear to ear. And as a result, the skull effectively is split into 2 pieces. And we call that a hinge-type fracture.
And after that, I felt no more pain. He was gone. Wiped it, gone.
19-year-old Conor McClelland of Castleblaney, County Monaghan, was arrested a few hours after the assault. He appeared before a special sitting of the District Court in Cavan this evening, charged with assault causing serious harm to Gavin O'Connor. An application for bail was made by Conor McClelland's solicitor. Gardaí objected on 3 grounds, citing the seriousness of the charge, the fact that more serious charges are pending, and the likelihood that the young man would abscond. The court heard how Conor McClelland has already tried to escape Garda custody twice since yesterday morning.
Conor McClelland was 19. He had 20 convictions behind them. That's a really worrying sign. That's what's known as red flag area, because now society needs to be looking at this guy and saying, this is a guy who continuously commits crime. There's no chance of this stopping. What are we going to do about it? Are we going to rehabilitate him? Are we going to put him in prison? Or are we going to do both? But certainly recidivist offenders, those who are repeating crimes again and again and again, we need to take a really firm view with, because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out they're going to keep doing it, and the next time it could be you, it could be murder.
With bail refused, McClelland was remanded in custody until his trial. Meanwhile, the O'Connors were trying to adjust to life at home without Gavin.
He was studying sound engineering, so he had his own recording desk up in his bedroom, and his bedroom was all set up where he just sat up there doing recordings and playing his guitar.
And it breaks me heart now to go up to his room because it's all sitting there. He walked out the door, he never came back.
We knew Gavin did backing singing in the band, but we never knew Gavin could actually sing. And after he died, we were up in his bedroom, and John, who has done sound engineering as well, on Gavin's computer found Gavin had recorded himself singing 3 songs. And it's so nice, although heartbreaking, to be able to listen to his voice now. I don't do it very often because it makes me sob, but we were totally amazed at how good a singer he was.
The taxman's taken all my dough and left me in my stately home, lazing on a sunny afternoon. And I can't sail my yacht, he's taken everything I got. All I've got's this sunny afternoon.
Shockingly, this was not to be the O'Connor family's only tragedy. Gavin's older brother Patrick was involved in a car accident in 2013.
I got the phone call here and I was told that Patrick was at being in a serious road traffic accident and he was gone to Navan. And I came in to Lena and I said to Lena, Patrick's after been in an accident. And she looked at me and she said, he's dead. We went to Navan, we were met by the Guardian, we were brought to Navan, and we stopped outside the hospital, and the guard says, settle yourselves down now before you go in there because your son is dead. That's what he said. And Alina grabbed my hand and she says, come on, Jerry, we've done this before, we have to do it again.
Patrick was our rock after Gavin died. Patrick was the one that brought us forward. He was the only child we had left in Ireland. I still can't believe that Patrick was taken from us as well.
He was going to be our rock, as Helena said it, coming up to the trial as well. He was down around Monaghan, Sussex Park, a space for us. He was going to be there sitting beside us. But unfortunately, he never got to it. He was gone.
And when Jerry and Helena next attended court, it would be without either of their beloved sons. The trial of Conor McClelland took place in February 2014, and for the O'Connors, facing their youngest child's killer was a chilling experience.
There was one morning he was brought in and he was stood directly in front of Jerry. And our liaison officer happened to notice and he nodded at the prison guard to move him. But how hard was that? This guy that murdered our son is standing directly in front of us and we're not supposed to react. And we didn't. But I just think it is wrong.
During the trial, the forensics had to give a description of Gavin's car when they found it. And on looking in the window of the car, they could see that the whole inside of the car was covered in blood. It was like a slaughterhouse.
There was blood spatter throughout the car, which indicated, obviously, that he was hit a number of times on the head and constantly hit on the head with the rocks.
Every night, I have to live with that. The beat that boy got up while he was asleep. It's wrong. Wrong. And then they checked the outside of the car to make sure it was roadworthy and everything. And on the doorpost at the front of the car, they found skin and hair where he ran Gavin down and bedded the windscreen. Deliberately done. To cover his tracks, make it look like a hit and run.
Throughout the course of the trial, Conor McClelland remained remorseless for the brutal murder of Gavin O'Connor.
He was prepared to eviscerate the victim, and we know that from the level of ultra-violence that was used. This wasn't just one hit, this wasn't just one stone, this was all of those things, and then he ran him over in a car. It's hard to fathom.
He had no consideration for human life whatsoever. For him, killing Gavin was just like kicking a Coke can down the street. It didn't matter to him whatsoever. He was asked how did he plead, and he pleaded not guilty. That's the only words he ever spoke. Not guilty.
Judge Patrick McCarthy imposed a mandatory life sentence and an additional concurrent 3-year jail term for the assault charge. The O'Connors live in dread of the day that McClelland will be released back onto our streets.
Well, my feelings on a life sentence is life should mean life. Like Conor McClelland will be, at the way time is going, he will be back on the streets in no length of time at all. My son lost his life, and we have a life sentence that we will bring to the grave with us. And I do firmly believe Conor McClelland should never, ever see the light of day again. He should be kept locked up for the rest of his life.
McClelland's future release will, of course, be a matter for the parole board.
Probably the most important question is the degree to which it is now safe to release the person. So therefore, there is a need for an evaluation, an individualised evaluation of each prisoner convicted of a serious violent offence to see if it is safe to release them.
Criminal personalities abound, and without a doubt, Conor McClelland had that criminal personality. Incapable of not offending. Offending is part of his life. Committing crime is part of his life. It's part of his DNA. It's genetic. It's his personality disorder. It will never change. It was almost inevitable that this was going to happen.
He should never get out. He slaughtered our son, and he got a mandatory life sentence. And there's every possibility if I go to Carrickmacross to do a bit of shopping and go to meet him coming walking up the street, and you're going to tell me that's justice. That's not justice in any man's eyes. He should never be out because they're going to put a killer back out on the streets. He's a killer now, and he'll be a killer for the rest of his life.